the webcast here, what I wanted to do is talk through ways you can make yourself redder in a way, right? Like learn how to be your own enemy. So let's walk through that super quick introduction. My name is Tim Medin. I am a principal consultant here at Red Siege. I'm the lead author for SANS 560, which is the network pen testing and ethical hacking course over at SANS. I also teach the advanced class 660. IANS faculty, program director for the SANS Masters program. The fun part is I've been pen testing for a number of years. And like most pen testers, at some point in my career, I actually did some of the blue team stuff, right? So I want to walk you through some of that process. A obligatory slide here, we'll come back to that a little bit later. But what I find here is that some of the best red teamers, I want to say offensive people, but I figured that's going to get jokes there. Cactus, nice. Some of the best red teamers start as defenders. They practiced defense many times even before getting into it, to defense or security in general, maybe some of the administration. But I find that the best red teamers often start being blue. And the reason is that what makes them so good is they know the defenses, they know the technology they've implemented, and then therefore know some of the weaknesses or common misconfigurations or ways around that. So I want to try to talk you through kind of my story a little bit, but also if you're in the blue team role, which is awesome, good for you. There's tremendous opportunities for that. Right? If you're watching the news during this whole COVID thing, there are breaches like crazy. But if you want to practice some of the red team stuff, I'll give you some ways that you can do some sort of light red in your blue team role, and then use that. Frankly, it's fun, right? And ideally make your organization more secure. So an important thing here to remember, and this, whenever I speak at conferences, people are like, Tim, don't tell people this. Like, we don't want people to know this. But the secret is between us. The red team isn't special, right? The only reason the red team exists is to make the blue team better. And if we fail to do so, we are a waste of time and money, right? And I see like some of the red team people are like, don't, man, you're ruining the whole thing. Like our job is to have fun, and what they do, right? No. Our job, if we are not making the defenders and the defenses better, as offensive people, we're a waste of resources. We are a waste of energy and waste of time and money, right? The thing to remember here is that the red and the blue, we're on the same side. We have the same goal. Our goal is to make the organization more secure. So red, whether that be a full-on red team or pen testers, I'm going to kind of combine these into just a more general red, just for simplicity. Our goal is, of course, to make them better and get in, find the vulnerabilities, find the technical as well as some of the maybe people and response capabilities, find those deficiencies and improve them so that when and if the bad guys get in, the real bad guys who are actually going to steal the data, crypto it, whatever they might do, ideally we can kick them out more quickly, or ideally even prevent them from getting in the first place. And it's always important to remember that deficiencies found by the offense are learning opportunities. There's, of course, some sort of onus on the blue team here as well. There are times where the blue team is like, I don't like that finding. I mean, that's fine. You can not like that finding, but it's real. A bad guy is not going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. Should I go and come back a little bit later? Right? That's not how this works. These failures are an opportunity to improve. So red and the blue, of course, need to work together, and we're seeing a lot more of this convergence. And frankly, I think I see mentioned in the Discord about purple. I think honestly, the purple team concept exists because, I'll take it on us, we as red teamers failed to serve their needs. we have, come in, written our reports, left, and the blue team is like, well, what the hell just happened? Like, I got this report, but like, can we discuss this? Like, I see the deficiency, but how can I work through the process? What am I missing? What are some of the detection capabilities that I have here, right? So we're going to talk through the this process a little bit. I like the quote here. I have never seen APT leave a sorry.txt. No, of course not, right? So one of the things that could make you better at your blue, your defensive role, is by playing a little bit of red. Right now, you can only get so good against playing against yourself, if you will, right? Like if you set up a chessboard and you play yourself in chess, there's a limit because you're not going to see new moves and such. But there is definitely value in sort of practicing against yourself, because that way you can sharpen some of the skills. You can say, hey, look, this action over here simulates what an attacker is doing. Can I prevent that? Right? It might not be perfect. Cool. Make it harder. Can I detect that? Ooh, that's the interesting one, right? We always love to kick the bad guy out and prevent them from being in the first place. But an important thing to remember is we have to reduce that dwell time. The bad guys are inside of our organization for months. We need to reduce that dwell time, get them out before we have any sort of significant data loss or corruption or whatever it might do. So you can do some of these things yourself, right? So what do I mean? Let's talk a little bit more broadly. So more broadly for the blue team people is, let's take a look at some of the common attack scenarios. What are common things that attackers are doing that I can tune my tools for, that I can tune some of my defenses for, right? Related to that, pick different parts of the attack chain. I don't care which sort of a chain you use, whether it's the kill chain, trademark, or whatever the crap, right? Or MITRE with their various chains. Pick some pieces in there that are some of the most salient, some of the most interesting ones, and work on either stopping those and work on stopping those as well as some of the detections here, right? And we're going to see, as I mentioned, a lot of the attackers are going to use some of these same sorts of techniques. If I can focus in on one of these broader, more important techniques, and maybe some of the tooling surrounding that, now we've got a more robust security program, right? So we'll talk about some of we want to, sorry, I can't talk today. We want to identify some of our deficiencies here, come up with ways to prevent. Maybe it's a mitigation. It's not 100%, but it makes it harder. Now the attacker, we're giving them more opportunity to get caught, right? They have to be much more targeted. Maybe they have to go slower, which then gives us as defenders more time. If I can make the attacker spend more time in my network or have to poke more systems, there's more opportunity for alerting, logging, and then response there, right? Now, the important thing here is your goal is not 100%. And security, one of the big problems we have is people want 100%. If it's not 100%, it's garbage. And that could be further from the truth, because frankly, none of our protections are 100%. So our goal here is to make things better, right? We want to make it better, increase our defenses, increase our responses. Are they going to be perfect? No. And that's fine. We're trying to move the needle. Would I like perfect? Absolutely. But again, we've got this, sort of diminishing returns, and without maybe someone who focuses solely on pen testing or red teaming, we can't get that same sort of test, but you can recreate a lot of the same types of things that me and my team and many of the other offensive people do, and then sort of tune and design and architect around some of that, right? So the key here isn't, again, for that 100%, it's to move the needle, right? You're down here, let's get it further to the other side so we can get better at our responses, better at our detections. So of course, we all know this, right? Passwords suck. There is no question, there's no argument. Passwords, they just suck, right? So from what we see from the attacker's side is they're looking in some of the breaches, they're taking the breached passwords, right? So let's say a user in your organization goes to crappycompany.com, creates a social media account at that crappy company, whatever the heck it is, then that organization is breached. As an attacker, I'm going to grab those password hashes, right, and crack that. Now, the real world adversary is going to then take the credentials, the usernames, and the passwords and start to use those at other places on the internet. Whereas the ethical ones of us, right, the ones who are only doing this with permission, I can't breach company A and then say, can I use this at, C, D, E, and F and everywhere else? But the true attacker's like, no, this is valuable. This is an asset. I have this from crappy company. Let's see if we can get into Google, Facebook, your organization, right? So one of the things that you should be doing is looking. Do some of your people have breached accounts someplace, right? Are they logging into some place with your company account? I don't care what your policy is, whether they're supposed to do that or not. People will do this and they will use the same password. So keep an eye out for some of those things. Try those credentials when you find them, and also we can use for some of the education here, right? And there's plenty of different places that do the same thing here. Dehashed is one of those. It's like $130 a year. The search interface leaves a little to be desired, but the price point here is quite reasonable, right? Other things that you can do inside your organizations. This of course is going to take some permission, but crack the password hashes, right? Get the permission. Say, hey, look, I want to perform a password audit inside of our organization. And we want to look for really bad passwords. Now, there's a whole debate on whether a crackable password is, by definition, a bad password. And sort of my response is, those are separate sets, because the attacker is only going to crack once they have access. How are they going to get access? Oftentimes by guessing. So what I want to do is identify the passwords that are going to be more likely guessable, right? If it's organization name and a number, or the season and year. I love the season and year. It's a gift that keeps on giving, right? We have to change our password every 90 days, because when Moses came down from the mountain, he had a third tablet and he said, thou shalt change thy no, right? It's because that's what the auditors have told us. And that's what we're always going to do, apparently, right? And so users can't remember passwords. So they quite literally look out the window and they're like, hey, it's summer. Cool, my password is summer. And they're like, dang it. Capital S, lowercase ummer, I need a number. Also, there's a summer this year, and ideally, there's a summer next year. If only there was a number that could differentiate this summer from next summer. And then their, infinite wisdom, they come up with season and year, right? And the next season and year, and so on. And us as offensive people use this all the time. So crack those. Look for passwords like this. If you have users in your organization using these types of passwords, you've got to break that cycle, right? And if you just end up telling people, hey, don't do this, frankly, I've heard of situations where people are like, you know what, I got this great idea from the security training to use a season and year. I know you're not supposed to, but I'm special, I'm different, because everyone thinks that they're special and they're different, right? And they're going to be okay, and there's no risk to them. But we've got to burn these types of passwords with fire. How do you identify them? Crack these terrible passwords and then train people. It's like, look, this is, you can't do this. You're going to have to change your password. And ideally, maybe you get people enrolled in additional training if they fail that enough times. Yeah, I mean, of course, the answer is NIST says use passphrases and add length. Absolutely. But we still see people, even though you add length, they're like summer 2020, 2020, like just made it longer, where they repeat some of that as well. So crack the ones that are going to be terrible, non-compliant with your policy. Also, there's a sort of off topic here is don't require the stupid complexity requirements because people just frankly guess that, right? So when we do this, if I'm going to do some of this password auditing inside my organization, we of course need to be very careful with this. I was doing a test, this was a while ago, maybe 4 years ago now, had access to the network, was looking around, and I found, I don't know who did it, but there was an ntds.dit on a file share, and the key was with it too. And I'm like, ooh, grabbed it, pulled it back. I had all the passwords. And what had happened is somebody was performing an audit. They were bouncing it off their file share, never cleaned it up. Be very careful with this, right? Make sure you only transmit it over encrypted protocols because this is extremely sensitive. Make sure you store it in only good, secure locations that we don't have access to. Because what you need to do is, of course, get these files from your domain controller over to some sort of cracking rig to do the cracking, right? There's a great blog post here on some of the password auditing. Check that out. The link is posted in the slides here. All right. So now some of the basics of cracking. I'm not going to go into this. We could actually spend this full hour talking through what does it look like to crack passwords. What are the different options I can use with Hashcat, right? We don't have time for that. You can read up on some of that yourself. The key here is let's get one of the ones that we know are really, really bad. Let's get rid of specific ones that we've had in our organizations that we know are bad, like company name followed by a digit, right? Of course, we've got the more globally bad ones, season and year. Also sort of related to this, make sure that your HR policy does not give new employees the same password. And what I mean by that is, and I've seen this, is like HR will say, hey, welcome to our company. Here's your new password. It is welcome1. Because guess what they're going to do? Change it to welcome2, right? So we have to be aware where we're setting people up for failure there, right? If you have, or frankly have ever had such a policy or organization, maybe you've got people who are still rotating. They're on welcome 99. So look for some of those. Again, Hashcat, there's tremendously good tutorials on things like that. Okay. Kerberoasting. Now, I did an entire talk on this. You actually see the video. This is the older video here. If you go to like redsiege.com, I think we have one recorded. If not, I will record it. But there's a Kerberos Attacks 101 where we go into much more depth on what you can do once you've successfully performed this attack, much more of an offensive focus. But let's talk into what the basics here of Kerberoasting, right? So once I'm on the network, what I can do is, as an attacker, me, the real attackers, we can start requesting service tickets, okay? So there could be in our organization a database server. We could have other services inside of our organization. And I, as a regular user, can request these tickets. Now, the interesting piece here is I don't have permissions. I don't have to have permissions to access the database server because the database server decides if I have access or not. But I can still request the ticket. You're probably wondering, like, why do I care if you request the ticket? The reason is that ticket for the service, for example, that SQL server is encrypted using the password hash of the SQL server. So if I, the attacker, can request a whole pile of tickets, now I can start to crack those tickets and use that to pivot throughout the organization. And if I can, talk to that SQL server over the network, I can probably gain access to that SQL server. So what we want to do is check that as well. See what we can access, what is accessible. This is also sort of a subset of our discussion related to cracking. So I can use something like invoke Kerberoast to grab those tickets, and then once again, Hashcat for the cracking. Now, if you're doing the broader password cracking, that we talked about a little bit ago, what we're doing here is we're focusing extra special on accounts that have what's called an SPN. So they're mapped in Active Directory. There's a database between the service and the underlying account. And the reason why these service accounts are interesting is we typically don't have an expiration for service accounts. In fact, they might quite literally have seen this where the account has existed for a decade or longer, or the password hasn't changed for a decade or longer. Whereas user accounts, we see a rotation that is a much more common, right? So related to this, and I talked about this before, is we're seeing that many organizations, when the adversary gets in, when the real bad guy gets in, it takes months to detect them, right? And the number is constantly changing. Fortunately, it's getting a little bit quicker. I think honestly, the reason that this is getting quicker between the initial compromise and the breach date is frankly ransomware, because they want you to know they're there. I honestly think that's the big move. I don't have stats on that, but that's just sort of in my head there. But the bad guys are in the organization for a significant period of time where they can be spreading out, getting good persistence, and frankly, maybe just cryptoing everything, right? Firing up the ransomware. So what we need to do is focus on some of the detections as well. So let's talk about some of the common detections that we can do here to help limit the bad guys' actions inside the network and find them a lot sooner. Again, none of these things are 100%. That is not the goal. The goal is to make it a smaller and smaller hole and a tighter window for the bad guy has to make it get through so they can actually compromise our network, right? None of these things are going to be 100%. I don't care what any vendor ever tells you, it is never 100%, right? So protections are important, but detection is an absolute must. So let's take a step back now. Let's talk more about Kerberoasting. So what I mentioned with Kerberoasting is what we do is we ask the domain controller, say, hey, just give me all the tickets. I want all the tickets for all of the service accounts. And then what I can do is, as an attacker, is I can offline crack these. So what you need to do is, and you can't just turn this off because this is a feature. This is a fundamental piece of Active Directory and its authentication. You don't just turn that off without having significant impact. So what we need to do is to focus here on some of the detection. And there's a phenomenal article here. Sean Metcalf, he's an absolute treasure for our industry, both personally as well as just an absolute genius. He's got a great article here on how can I perform an audit and get some of the alerting around some of the Kerberos pieces. So for example, here we've got the event ID 4769, a Kerberos service ticket was requested. Now you're going to have people request these all the time. What you want to do is focus on, hey, is somebody requesting a lot of tickets? Because that's atypical. One, that's going to happen all the time. Two, it's still going to happen a decent amount of time. Three, that's pretty rare. 4, 5, 6, a dozen, you really want to follow up on that because that's probably what's happening. And of course, test that, right? Use the tools we talked a little bit about to tune this to say, look, you know, 1 or 2, okay, there's not much I can do there, but let's crank it up. If anyone tries to request more, we definitely have a problem. And what that it makes the attackers do now is request a single ticket at a time and go much lower and much slower, which means they increase some of their dwell time. Also, what we as an attackers, as red team folks like, is we like tickets that are encrypted with RC4. And the reason is, it means cracking is significantly faster, or an order of magnitude plus faster. So if you've got all of a sudden some weird requests for RC4 tickets, might want to follow up on some of that. Again, you can use the offensive tool, so you can play with Kerberoasting over here to test your defenses you're playing against yourself here to tune those defenses to make your life a little bit ideally easier because you're now not getting breached, right? Try things like password spraying, right? Once someone gets inside the organization, we do this all the time as pen testers. Let's see what else we can access. Maybe, as I've done red teams before, we land on Steve in accounting or Sally in marketing's computers, right? And now we want to move to someone else. We talked about some of those bad passwords just a little while ago. The goal with a password spray is not to take a single account and try all of the passwords. It's to take a single password and try it across all of the accounts. So what we're not going to do is we are not going to trigger a lockout, right? Can you detect that? Can you respond to that? So if you're seeing a single IP address requesting authentication over and over and over again to a number of accounts, your controls like lockout are going to fail you here. They're not going to help. You have got to be able to detect this, and then ideally respond to this. One of the great tools here is from Bo Bullock from Black Hills, his domain password spray tool, which is built for things like this. And there's other similar tools as well. There's supposed to be a new cool one coming out, Thread Spray. I forget the name. It's not publicly released yet. But again, the focus here is on detection. I can't stop this, right? Because users need to authenticate. But what I can do is look for these weird situations and then shut it down, ideally pull a system off the network, fire up incident response. Other important things. It's always important to think, what does the bad guy want in my organization, right? Sort of an aside here, if you're doing pen tests, ask this question. And frankly, if you're buying pen tests, if you are procuring pen tests, I like the word procure, sounds fancy. But if you're involved in this, as the pen tester should always ask, what is the important data? What data or process, if lost, stolen, compromised, destroyed, would cause the greatest heartache to your organization? What would keep you up at night? If that question isn't being asked, find different pen testers, because they might be focusing on domain admin, right? Which is a useful tool, but that's not the destination. So when it comes to our defenses, we need to ask that question too, because we want to put our defenses surrounding that data. And it's so easy to get stuck in this from a defensive perspective, myself included, because I was there with you, to think about general defenses instead of specific defenses around the most sensitive data. And frankly, as us as pen testers, if I want to go low and slow, I can go lower and slower if I'm just looking for one thing. If I'm trying to access everything and I want to move a lot, that's going to be much noisier than just going for the one interesting thing. So it's always important to start with that end in mind. One of my favorite tools for something like this is PowerView. There's the find interesting domain share file. Terrible name, right? Can't even say it. I love this thing. This is tremendously useful for me as an offensive person, and I think it's hugely, even more so important for the blue team people. And the reason is, so often we find data quite literally just littered throughout the organization. You're going to have file shares. The end users are going to set up file shares all the time. You're going to have centralized file shares with improper permissions. And what I find is that it's on that system, but no one worries about the permissions, which means Steve in accounting or Sally in marketing or whatever can now access this sensitive data. And what that means now is any breach inside your organization now increased severity, right? That single fish comes in to a user, that marketing person, right? I don't want to pick on marketing, but I pick on marketing because they're not going to have access to that sensitive data inside your organization, right? Most of the time. And if they do, you've got some permissions issues. So I find this all the time. I was doing a test almost 2 years ago now, and it was honestly, it was the first test that was just a giant pain. It was horrible. I couldn't escalate, couldn't pivot. I'm like, you know what? I need to go for a walk. And I found myself thinking, oh, you know what? Focus on the data, Tim, knucklehead. Every once in a while, even I need that, even though I pound on this over and over again. So I came back in, started looking for some of the shares, and found all over the place there was bank accounts and routing numbers. Now, this was an organization where I forget the number, but I think you had to have like $10 million to come to even knock on the door. So as an attacker, I mean, I only need $10 million. I would be super thrilled with a single $10 million. I'd be happy with $1 million, right? So they don't need to get to the center, right? To get to the juicy core when you just have these beautiful morsels all over the place. So make sure you're looking for that. Use these tools as defenders to look for this, because guess what? Some of the attackers are going to do some of this as well. So the comment here from Cactus is depend on file share auditing. Yes, but is anybody doing with some of the auditing too? I think that's a great discussion point there, Cactus. Another useful tool for us as attackers, movement. I get access to one system, now what? Right? The attacker is oftentimes not going to get into your organization, land on a single system, and stop. They're going to get in and then pivot. They're going to get in and move. And it's becoming harder and harder to use some of the off-the-shelf tools, Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, because frankly, the defensive tools are tuned to find those, right? That's sort of a whole interesting debate here. We see a lot more focus on living off the land and the binaries associated with that, or our LOL bins, living off the land, right? So if I can use built-in executables, if I can use built-in features, if I can use tools that are signed by Microsoft, as an offensive person, maybe we can slip through the radar a little bit, right? So here's a couple of examples where we're going to use PS exec. This is a tool from sysinternals. This is a Microsoft tool signed by Microsoft, which means in many organizations, this is going to fly under the radar. Similarly, WMIC built into Windows. We can use this to run commands on other computers and use this for lateral movement. Of course, we've got PowerShell, which is built in. We're seeing that's significantly harder these days, and frankly, we're seeing a lot of tooling around PowerShell, which means it increases the likelihood of getting caught. So what we want to do here is, because we're using built-in tools, it's going to be harder oftentimes to focus on the tools. Let's look for the artifacts, right? If someone tries to come to the door and knock to get in, to authenticate, right? There's going to be events associated with that. So let's look, so use these tools yourselves, right? Try to use PS exec, try to use some of these other tools, and can you detect some of this lateral movement, right? Valid, right? This is going to be a valid user accessing another system. But also, why is Steve in marketing trying to access all these systems? That's weird, right? Related to that, firewall off all of your end user systems so that no other user can hit those systems on 445. There is no reason that even Steve sitting next to, I don't know, what names have I used, right? Susan, and they're both in marketing, there is no reason they need to hit the share on each other's systems. So disable that, set a firewall rule. Also, if it does happen, alert on that. So you now have a detection as well as a response. Now, if Steve is compromised and starts trying to access a whole bunch of servers, that of course is going to be something to look at from a detection perspective. It's like, wait a second, why is Steve trying to log into all of these systems? That's weird, isn't it? Right. So that's a great opportunity for a detection mechanism. A great log here as well. Right, so there's of course there's going to be tons and tons of these different tools used by red teamers, and what I would suggest to you is practice some of those tools. It's funny, I told you before that I'm the lead author for the SANS pen test course, right? We have thousands of people who go through that every single year. By and large, it's defensive people. And what they're trying to do is learn some of these tools. I mean, frankly, because it's a hell of a lot of fun. But ideally, at least in my mind, I'm hoping they're going back to their organization, using some of these tools, finding deficiencies and fixing them. And ideally, too, is not just fixing the holes to prevent the attacks, but we really need to focus on some of those detection pieces as well. Okay? So with that, I am going to wrap up. By the way, if you want to contact, we have this for a lot of our services. We focus completely on the offense, pen test, red team, all that kind of jazz. So feel free to check that out. We're going to field some questions here. We'll see. I'm going to look over to the Discord. Also, if you want to just type in the chat in GoTo here. If you're interested in talking to us, just type Red Siege and we will reach out and contact you. All right, let me see here for questions. Do you have recommendations? This is from Sean. I think that's supposed to be Sean. Sean, today, do you have any recommendations on how to have an organization sign on and allow cracking? So I'm assuming what you mean here is how to have permission, right? Frankly, just ask. Like, put together a proposal and be like, look, here's what I want to do. Now, an important thing with this asking, give justification. This is a thing. Jeff McJunkin, good friend of mine, we talk about is give people an incentive. Give them a reason to say yes. Don't just say, hey, here's what I want to do, because they're going to push back and be like, no. Hey, I want to crack passwords because I want to find these bad passwords. I want to get them out of our organization to increase our security and limit the availability of these passwords to attackers, right? That sounds way more interesting, right? Way much richer conversation. And now if they say no, they frankly sound like jerks, right? Make a bad decision. So that incentive piece, super, super important. What kind of alarm bells does find interesting domain share file set off? This thing is extremely loud if you're looking. So it's going to enumerate the list of computers inside your network. It is going to get the shares on those particular systems and then start crawling this. So if you're looking for that kind of activity, and frankly, most organizations are not, because they're like, it's the file share. Why would I audit activity on the file share? Because I'm just going to fill up my logs. So it is loud, but a lot of places aren't doing any sort of detection and response associated with that. Do you ever bypass host-based firewall rules? Not usually. We'd have to, frankly, no. I mean, it's just too much of a pain. I don't want to bounce against that firewall rule over and over and over again. And if I got on the system where I could disable the firewall rules, well, I'm already on the system, so then it sort of a chicken and egg problem I already have in, so why do I need to do such a thing? What usually is there are specific ports that are allowed open, and I could just use those specific ports. When people are talking to you about, do you have alerts set up and stuff like that, we're talking about a SIM, or is there something better, more recommended? That's it. Now that SIM question, that's a very broad question, right? How do you have that tuned? How are the alerts escalated? Focus on the important ones, right? Like, if someone's inside my organization beating up these passwords, oh my gosh, that's of course that means a bad guy's in. I'm not pretending that this is a simple discussion, because that tuning piece is important. What I want you to do is to use some of these tools to test your SIM, right? Like, hey, I just fired up like this invoke Kerberos all over the place, and I didn't see a single thing. Okay, time to adjust. Hey, I just tried to fire up my password spray throughout the organization. Cool, totally blind there as well. Hey, we just tried to do a lot of lateral movement all over, again, blind, adjust. So not saying like fit everything, but try some of these tools and then adjust as well. Is offensive security more convenient than defensive security, considering what the tools and defenses are available? I don't know what you mean necessarily about convenient. I will say, frankly, that the offense's job has gotten harder because the defenses have gotten better. It used to be like when I first started, we would get in regularly on external pen tests. Now that's exceedingly rare. We are seeing, that's why we're seeing the attackers switch to phishing, because that's the way in. We're seeing that software is getting more and more robust. There's additional security protections around that. We're finding that like the AV and EDR is actually getting pretty darn good, right? I remember when Defender first came out, that thing was laughable. We're like, Microsoft's coming up with a defensive tool? And now when you got Defender with the ATP, that thing's pretty darn difficult to bypass. And it's not just them. There's plenty of other vendors in that space that have a very good product that make it significantly more difficult. Again, I might be able to get around like the signature based, but some of these tools now are like, you know what? That activity you're doing, that's weird. It goes back to my detection piece, right? It didn't stop the initial compromise, but now it's like, you know what? This action now is weird. Let's alert, ideally even prevent that as well. Cool. Other questions? Did I see any other questions coming in? I think I've learned everything I know about red teaming between Red Siege and BHIS. I take that as a high compliment. I love the BHIS. BHS doesn't recommend cracking current passwords because of the risk. You can crack old hashes out of volume shadow copies without that risk. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I can't comment on behalf of BHIS, but I don't think that's totally true there. So the last presentation I did, I had a couple of typos. So Ghost is here. I'm reviewing your slides, Tim, for spelling errors. Oh, Justin did it for me. God, Justin. Thank you, Justin. Cool. I think that might wrap it up. If you've got questions, feel free to throw them into the Discord. I'm going to run downstairs, grab a sandwich, come back up. Be more than happy to chat with you folks. Other than that, thanks for coming. And hopefully when we get back to normal, I got shirts all over the place, including the one I'm wearing, and my office is a disaster, but we can start giving away some cool swag. Appreciate it. Thank you.